Hey lieve luisteraar, voor je gaat luisteren naar dit nieuwe gesprek in de reeks Why Do You podcast, wil ik jou graag nog iets vragen. Ik wil jou een gunst vragen, want ik wil jou graag beter leren kennen. En daarom heb ik een vragenlijst gemaakt. De link staat in de show notes. Neem er even een paar minuutjes tijd voor en laat mij weten wie dat jij bent, waarom je naar deze podcast luistert en hoe dat ik deze podcast nog beter voor jou kan maken. Alvast een hele dikke dankjewel. Ga dan nu gezellig luisteren naar een hopelijk voor jou interessant en inspirerend gesprek. Why do you podcast? That's one of the questions I ask all my guests in this podcast series. In over 100 episodes, I've gotten more than 100 different answers, and I'm still curious for more. I'm Annelies, a strategic podcast manager in Belgium, and I confess, a podcast junkie. Please join me in listening to this new episode and discovering yet another podcast why. Along the way, you will also get lots of tips and inspiration to apply to your own podcast or to get you started. Enjoy! So, Lucinda, tell me, what is the title of your podcast and what is it about?
Yes. Okay, well, thanks for having me on. I'm Lucinda Snape. I'm a presenter and a producer at Gibraltar Broadcasting Corporation. So we are based to the south of Spain. A lot of people say, well, where is Gibraltar? It's a very small British overseas territory. We've got a population of around 38,000 people, and GBC is the national broadcaster. So I work in the radio area primarily, and have recently been branching out into podcasting. And that's a fairly new area for us at Gibraltar Broadcasting Corporation to get into. We have a few different podcasts available on the site, things looking at, for example, when there was an election held 2 years ago here, we're doing weekly analysis of that. There's also life stories and a daily news program. We take the audio from that, repurpose it and make it available as a podcast too. I'm involved in GBC's newest podcast offering, and it's a concept I came up with last year, 2024, called Born on the Rock, Gibraltar Birth Stories. And I had the idea that becoming a mother, a parent, is so life-changing, completely life-changing. And so many people go through this. And I always say, everybody has a mother. And I wanted to set about speaking to local mothers about what their experience was like. That's it, and quite simply that. Any decade, any type of experience at all, for people to come into the studios. We've got lovely professional equipment to sit down and just explain their stories of what it was like to become a mother. And I've been really surprised, really pleasantly surprised at the amount of people that have been willing to come forward. I was worried people might not talk about this, and some taboo subjects have come up. But essentially, that's the name of it. Born on the Rock, Gibraltar Birth Stories podcast. Yeah. And we're sort of 5 months in now. Episode 21 just dropped today. And I'm really proud of how it's going.
Yeah, this is really cool because I've had some guests on that say, yeah, I always dreamed of being a radio star, but that dream didn't come true. So I have my podcast, and it feels like a little bit of my dream of being a radio voice, but you are a radio voice.
Yeah, well, exactly. And your second question is, why do you podcast? And the first thing that popped into my head was because I can. I've been in broadcasting
because you can. That's a good reason.
Because I can. I've been in broadcasting over a decade now. This wasn't always my career. I moved into this from doing other work. I was an analyst previously. I've worked in marketing and events. And I got into broadcasting in 2014. I remember where I was when I heard the advert for, do you want to become a radio presenter? And I started doing weekends, and then I moved to part-time, doing some production. And then I got the morning show about 8 years ago here at Radio Gibraltar. And so through that, I've developed lots of skills. I make my own competitions, lots of audio. I do a lot of production, and I'm completely in charge of creative control of the morning show. And I love that freedom. I love that creativity, and I have picked up a lot of skills along the way. And so, when podcasting has sort of come along, I've really found that I've been able to just own it myself. And I've found that really refreshing. I haven't had to go and ask or outsource anything to other departments. I'm making decisions on how that podcast sounds. And I'm being very intuitively led by what feels right, what sounds right. And just from my decade of experience in doing this, in this field, really. So my main answer is because I can. And there's sort of like a second part of that. I kind of dabbled in podcasting last year outside of my work. So outside of GBC, I teamed up with two family members who were interested in creating a podcast about sobriety, about living a life with no alcohol. And I'm nearly 3 years sober myself now. And I thought, I'm interested in that. So as a three, we very ad hoc did some home recordings. I was using my home laptop. I was propping it up in the kitchen. The audio quality was terrible. It was very clunky and very amateurish. But we felt really engaged. We were so happy to be talking about a project that we felt was really meaningful, about, challenges of taking alcohol out of your life, how to deal with people's questions, the health benefits, looking at news reports. And so the three of us, for the whole of 2024, outside of my work, ran a very clunky, a very amateurish podcast. But we felt really good talking about something that we were really passionate about. And I think that's got to be one of the biggest components of any successful podcast that you can keep updating regularly, is that passion, isn't it? And so, we've sort of paused that for now. All of that podcast still exists. It's still out there, but it's not my best work. So then it was very, just done at home.
Yeah, I can imagine there would be a difference recording a podcast at your kitchen table compared to a radio studio. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why it's been so refreshing to now create Born on the Rock. We launched in January 2025. And of course, I have the professional radio studios, the full desks, the full microphone kit. I have tech support, which is always helpful.
Yeah.
And just access to much nicer, soundproof in the studios. And that's really helped. And I think you can hear the difference. This podcast sounds more professional than first attempts last year. But I think it's probably, maybe you've had that, Anne, with some of your guests, that people have tried different things before they found a format that worked.
Yes. Yeah. My guest on the last episode was already on her third podcast show. And the one before that was on her second, I believe. So, yeah. And for me, this is also my third one. And cannot say too much about it yet, but there might be and something new also brewing. So, yeah. But yeah, we learn as we do, and each time gets better, I think. Yeah. But I'm actually wondering also why, because you're doing this for GBC, for the broadcasting company. So where did you decide to not make it a radio show and do a podcast?
Oh, that's a great question, Anne, and something I'm really passionate about. And actually, it's one of the reasons that my guests have been saying yes and coming forward. These are not glamorous, polished people. These are very busy, everyday, ordinary people juggling family households. They are not interested in having their faces on camera. They are not interested in having a prime time television slot. And they are certainly not interested in trying to describe one of the most personal, intimate, life-changing events in exactly 30 minutes to fit the slot of a radio or a television program. So the idea that these long-form podcasts exist, I don't record visuals, and my guests like that, and their story can simply take as long as it takes. And so I have episodes that range between 22 minutes and 1 hour 45. And it's fine. And it's so refreshing, I think, especially for the national broadcaster, to be able to offer a new way of connecting people, bringing the community together and communicating that isn't limited by those kind of boundaries and parameters that traditionally television and radio do. Half of what I spend my time doing, Anne, is actually explaining to guests and potential guests what is a podcast, and explaining it's like an audio library. You can listen when you like. It won't be playing in people's cars while they're driving. They don't have to listen to you talking about your cervix while they're loading the dishwasher, out loud. There's some really private, personal information that people talk about, and it has to be done really respectfully with the right tone. And I think podcasting has just lent itself to that so beautifully, these really big and important stories. It's so lovely to be able to capture them and share them. People go through childbirth and it's buried at the back of their minds. You've gone through it, you quickly hit the ground running, you've got to adapt to parenthood, sleeping and feeding. And before you know it, that's just way behind you and it doesn't come up in conversation. It's not a short, easy topic for a lot of people. There's a lot of taboos, Anne, and this podcast has raised subjects like postnatal depression and losses that people have experienced and infertility. I'm finding that's becoming a real topic. People are so grateful to have the opportunity to say, hey, I couldn't get pregnant. Here's the steps that we went through on our journey to get there. And there's stories that almost sound miraculous in the way that people have gone through them. So in short, that's why podcasting has really worked for this particular genre. And I'm really kind of proud to be able to offer that platform for people to come in and speak at their own pace in as much detail as they want. Like I gently guide people along chronologically and I'll ask questions. Do you mean this or did you mean that? What year did that happen? I will just gently jump in, but it's in my guest's own words, and how refreshing to be given that kind of permission in a comfortable, quiet studio to say, here's what happened. Here's my experience. This is how it happened to me. I felt like this. I felt like that. I wished I'd known. I asked my guests, what would you go back and tell yourself as a new mother? I don't want to try and give advice. I'm not a medical expert at all. I mean, I've learned a lot now. But I don't want to be giving of medical advice, but it's so nice to ask parents to reflect. What would you have gone back and told yourself in those early days when things were really tough? You know what I mean? Like kindness to yourself. And I hope that new parents, people who are trying to start a family, even grandparents, anybody that wants to listen might be able to take something from that. And I really feel as though the podcast offers a level of support that you probably can't measure, but I really feel as though it does support people in thinking, this is a topic so many people, are involved in. Let's talk about it. Let's make it a little more accessible.
Yeah. And imagine, I'm thinking now, because I don't have kids, so I've never been through anything like that. But I can imagine for the child, because as you say, everyone has a mother, for the children also to have this story told about your birth that you can listen to when you're obviously a bit older, not when you're a kid maybe, but yeah, that also must be amazing. But yeah, it's too soon to get stories about that, but maybe in 20 years you could do a follow-up series talking to the kids that were born on the rock. Yeah,
true, that's true. But you're right, what a legacy, what a gift to be able to tell your child in detail without any embarrassment, like how it happened. And for that child, like you say, years down the line, because digitally this is preserved now, that story exists, and it's not anything that comes up in conversation. It's not easy to talk about face to face. And you're right, these now exist, and I'm so proud now. I'm at the stage now, Anne, where because episode 21 went out today, it's finally starting to look like a library. It's looking like a collection into season 2 now. And that's really exciting, because I like to think that anybody involved in parenting can start to find a story they can relate to. Oh, that sounds a little bit like what happened to me. And as I say, Anne, there are topics here that are quite unique to Gibraltar. This is a very small place. It's just 2 miles long. We have a land border with Spain, and facilities here are not the same as you would have in London, for example. So if a guest, and actually this is my own parenting experience 13 years ago, if a guest has a premature baby that arrives before 34 weeks of gestation, they cannot stay in Gibraltar. They must go either to Spain or to the UK for specialist neonatal care. That doesn't exist here, and that's a major level involved in that whole process and that whole story. So in my situation, my child was born and moved to Cadiz in Spain for 5 days and then down to Algeciras. And I commuted every day 45 minutes to see my baby, trying to get by in medical Spanish. And it had an impact on me. I found that really tough. Thankfully, she was fine and well and healthy. We came back to the Rock. She has a younger sister who came along not long after that. But for the longest time, I thought, I've been through a hugely big, almost traumatic experience. And it's so refreshing now, Anne, over a decade later, having these conversations with other mothers. Other people feel like that. It's that big for other people, even if they've had a textbook traditional story. And actually, those are the ones I'm trying to catch more of, is people that have had a completely ordinary experience. Because obviously people who've had dramatic tales are the first ones that want to speak. So the traditional textbook birth stories are really valuable in their own right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I'm sure they are. I was wondering because you are such a small, yeah,
Nation.
part of nation, part of the world. Yeah. Do you have also a lot of listeners outside of Gibraltar? Because there's mothers and babies being born all over the world, and it's in English.
Yes.
So do you see
Yeah.
that in your data that you have reach a lot of listeners all over the world?
Yes, because, and you find the same, once the episode is available, your guest likes to share that with their family and friends. And so I have guests here who do have family scattered around the world. And last time I looked on the Acast stats, I think we had downloads in 52 countries, which I was really surprised about, like happy to hear that. But it is a relatable topic. You can listen to a birth story from a completely different country, and of course there'll be differences. But the general primitive process hasn't changed massively, you know what I mean, across decades and decades and hundreds and thousands of years. And that's why I do think the podcast is so relatable. And that's why I think it has legs, you know what I mean? That's why I do think it will last. When we launched, I had somebody say to me, hey, it's a great idea, good luck, but you're going to run out of stories because, there's so few. And I said, no, because I'm inviting stories across all decades. I mean, there's one birth per day on average here in Gibraltar. Sometimes none, sometimes 2 or 3. But across a year, any typical year, and it's remained like that for some time, on average, there's 1 birth per day. Now, I'm not trying to catch each of those people. And not everybody wants to talk about their stories, but I'm going way back. And my earliest episode is a lady who shared her birth experience from 1971. And I've got a story from 1979. And I'm in talks at the moment to try and get a lady who might be able to share her experience from the 1950s.
Oh,
Taking a lot of very careful setup with her daughter. I mean, that's a very different, but that's my point. I've got stories from the 1980s, and those, Anne, are amazing because you're capturing stories where there were no ultrasound scans. You couldn't do 3D, let alone 4D, 5D images of the baby. You had to go and get tested for pregnancy when you pretty much thought you were pregnant. There was no home tests. You couldn't find out the gender. And things were done very differently during labour. There was a higher use of forceps, very invasive, painful labour techniques used in the old days are not really used these days. And so to hear these women explain what birth was like, but then also, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that adds a real cultural, historical, social element to the podcast as well, which again doesn't really exist anywhere else to my knowledge. And again, I just think that makes it so valuable, so exciting to be able to access. These are the kind of things you want to be able to ask people, but you can't in conversation. So to get the historical aspect is the other reason why I'm very confident that we should continue to get stories that people share. And here's the thing, Anne, it's never right or wrong, is it? Like that experience, your experience. And so nobody's being judged. No one's saying, actually, that didn't happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Imagine.
true. Yeah, imagine. All right. What I'm wondering now also is, have you interviewed your own mother about your birth?
I haven't yet. I only know basics. She tells me that I was a very fast arrival because I was not her first baby. But, and I want to have this conversation really, I suppose, with my mum. But again, it just when's the right time? And she doesn't live here in Gibraltar, so I only see her a couple of times a year. What I will tell you, though, Anne, is that she has listened to every single episode in true supportive style. And I really value that. I kind of need somebody to hear every episode and give me feedback. Oh, I thought she spoke brilliantly. Oh, I was a bit confused when she said this. Oh, my goodness, I had no idea. For example, like what the IVF process is for infertility. People have to go across to Spain for treatment. She's listening and learning as I am as we go along. So no, I haven't had this conversation with her yet. But that also reminds me that is part of the opening format, actually, of each episode. Because, I mean, how do you start these podcast episodes? What I tend to do is ask my guests, were you born on the rock yourself? And what do you know about your own story? Because a lot of people have been told a sentence, oh, you arrived ever so quickly, or, oh my goodness, your birth was very difficult. Or a lot of people tend to know something. And we kind of take that as a starting block before just to warm people up before we get into the conversation of, at what point did you want to decide to be a mother? Also, sorry, that just also leads me on to the fact that out of these 21 episodes, I'd say about 19 of my guests all say, yes, I always knew I wanted to be a mother. From a little girl, I always wanted. And what I found interesting, Anne, is the one or two who actually, a bit like me, said, no, motherhood was never really on my radar until I reached later life, had a health scare, for example, met the right person. And so those have been very interesting as well, just to ask people, at what point do you have a conversation about starting a family? I mean, that's a really big deal anyway. And then there's some really funny stories as well about how people discover that they're pregnant. You know, there's comedy in here. That's
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I can imagine that too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, people are thinking it's an April Fool's, or you know, people only finding out quite late. So those are quite amusing stories anyway. Like, how did you find out you're pregnant? How did you tell your partner if they weren't with you at the time? And then how did the pregnancy treat you? You know, and you have some people that say, oh, it's plain sailing, and other people that say, oh my gosh, I was so poorly. And again, I'm capturing that whole kaleidoscope, that whole range of experiences, because you can read about what pregnancy is like. You can be told, you can have the textbook, baby is the size of a banana, baby is the size of, you know, a pineapple or whatever. But I think it's so valuable hearing other people's descriptions of that sort of thing as well. So, but yeah, that question does come up at the start of each of my episodes. You know, what do you know about your own birth? What has your mum told you?
Yeah. Yeah, because it might say a lot about how the birth also goes for you, because maybe some things are like genetic or
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So you always have guests on. That's the concept of the show. Yeah.
Yep, one guest. So far, I'm working at one a week. I will say I'm working flat out. I will say that this is taking more effort than possibly I thought it might, but I have high standards. And I also am doing this on the back of my daily morning radio show. So I'm on air between 10 and 1 o'clock every day, and I prep an hour or so before and after. Then I'll spend a lot of my afternoons getting my guests in, approaching people, responding to emails, and editing and, you know, producing and actually typing up for the social media side, the Facebook and the Instagram. Sometimes I'm doing some of these things on my sofa of an evening.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's taking a lot more work than I expected, but I mean, this will probably lead on to one of your next questions about why the passion, you know, why are you doing it?
Yeah, it does. But also, I was wondering about the guests. Do you have also expert guests, like medical professionals?
So far, one,
Okay.
and she was so hard to get hold of. She was
Yeah.
really hard to track down because the maternity unit, I think, found this very new. And as with a lot of new things and a new concept of podcasting, perhaps felt a little skeptical and want to see how it goes first. So I spent a lot of time chasing the maternity unit because exactly that. I thought, do you know what? I would love to be able to get a special guest on at the end of season 1 and actually finish each season, 12 episodes, and finish with a really unusual, really impactful story, especially from a medical professional. And yes, I managed to get hold of an incredible midwife who's got 2 decades of local experience. I mean, she doesn't keep track of how many births she's delivered, she's been involved with. She's episode 13. And what was really special about that one actually was I was able to ask all of my layperson questions. What does this mean? What do you do in that situation? Like, you know, all of these things, especially Gibraltar centric. But then, as the second part of that episode, she shared her own birth story too. And she had a very positive experience. But what was nice is she explained how during labor, she kept switching between her mother brain going, oh my gosh, I can't take the pain. This is unbearable. I had no idea it'd be this frightening. And then her professional brain would kick in and say, you need to breathe. You absolutely can do this. This is totally normal. And she explained how she kept switching between the two mindsets. I thought that was fascinating. But we covered so many different topics. And I thought, again, for anybody that would be interested in starting a family or just how things work, you know, all of the questions you want to ask a midwife, we were able to ask. It's a long episode. I was like a bumper, 1 hour 40 or something, but she spoke brilliantly. She was so open, shared her personal experience. And I do have a doctor coming in next week to record as well, who again is willing to speak professionally, her observations of trends, changes in Gibraltar across the years, and, you know, technology and health. Actually, my midwife spoke about obesity and self-care, and that there's a rise in cesarean sections, for example, people choosing to have the operation to give birth. She noted, you know, things that I had no idea about, trends like that. So my next guest, who will be a doctor coming in, I'm hoping to be able to ask the same sort of thing. What trends has she observed? What are some of the more unusual situations she's observed? Actually, as well, Anne, one of the questions I ask is, how do you cope when things go wrong? And it's really hard to talk about these things, but stillbirths and miscarriages have happened. They do happen. I think the rate is 1 in 4 in the UK. Pregnancies will end in a miscarriage. And so I haven't been able to escape that topic. It's obviously come up in some of the episodes. And I've got 2 or 3 that are particularly hard-hitting, emotional, which is nuts because 8 minutes later you'll be laughing at the way they describe something. And yet in a few more minutes' time, you're choked and tearful because of the emotion involved in loss, in the journey not going to plan. So that was one of the questions I asked her. I did say, how do you cope when you go to bed that night and normally you've done a job that's so rewarding and so fulfilling, and yet that day it went wrong? And again, she spoke beautifully about just being there, being a witness, being a support, being present for that person going through that horrendous experience. And then what I thought was really powerful, she said, sometimes you don't. And I asked, how do you cope? She said, sometimes you just carry it. It was really, honestly, I've got goosebumps now just telling you about that conversation because it was so powerful, and it's not talked about, but people experience these taboos, these things that are swept under the carpet. And we know now, do we not know now, that for mental health awareness and support, that one of the best things you can do is to talk about things, normalize things, just hear somebody else's story. Think, do you know what? I am not the only person in the world that's gone through this terrible or dramatic, this event. And so that really drives me. I genuinely think it's one of the biggest things driving me to capture these stories is to create a platform, a library where people can get support. I'll never be able to measure how helpful that is to people or not, but I know as a podcast listener, I know how much you can take from just hearing an episode on your terms in a quiet space when you're ready to listen. I listened to lots of podcasts when I was giving up alcohol. I wanted guidance. I wanted to hear some academic reviews. I listened to a lot of podcasts to help change my mindset when we were going to do that sort of sobriety setup. So that gave me a great experience as a listener. So I know how valuable and how strong an impact a podcast can have when you choose to have a listen.
Yeah, totally true. But that leaves me wondering, what's in it for you? And then also, my question that I usually ask is, what has the podcast done for you or given you? Because usually I interview business owners that use a podcast as a marketing tool, and then so then it's obvious, you get leads, you get new clients. But what is in it for you?
Yeah, for me personally, just that feeling that when I rest my head on the pillow at night, I feel as though I've done something. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, and I hope
Let's hope not. Touch wood.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, me too. I'd like to think I've created something. I've used the skills that I've been given on this planet. I've tried to use them for some good, and I've tried to create something that helps other people. And I don't know where this is leading. I don't know how many episodes or seasons will come of this, but I'm really just so proud that it helps enhance the offering of the national broadcaster as well. For GBC, I think this is really exciting, that it's a totally different kind of podcast that we've never offered before. And so it's another way of connecting with our community. And because we are such a small nation, it's really important. Topics like community and keeping things really local is very important to us. We have a local radio station because we can offer things to listeners that you won't get from tuning into a London station, for example. Your What's On diary, events that are going on, competitions, fundraisers. And so I'm really excited professionally that it offers the corporation something very exciting and very fresh, and to maybe a sort of a younger demographic, potentially than some of our TV and radio shows historically have. But on a personal level, just that, I kind of feel like I'm giving something back. I went through an experience and I feel as though I'm using that to try and create something really positive. And it's that I just get a real kick out of it. I'm so driven. It's quite hard to explain that I just feel like I need to do this. And that sounds really overdramatic, but it feels like a bit of a calling that I have to create this library. I have to leave something behind that used my skills and my own birthing experience to create a platform to support other mothers. It's the biggest thing I've ever been through in my whole life. And so I know that I'm not alone in feeling like that. So yeah, slightly fluffy answer there. Sorry.
No, it's a beautiful answer. Yeah, I think there should be more people doing this with the kind of passion that you have for it. Yeah, because
Yeah, that's the thing.
as you say, listening to a podcast can be so helpful in a lot of situations. Just to feel that you're not the only one going through something. If it doesn't matter, it's becoming a mother, be, quitting alcohol, quitting smoking, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, there's strength in unity, isn't there, in
Yes.
coming
Yeah.
together. And I
Yeah.
just really, really feel that. And I noticed one of your questions was, what are the ingredients to make a really good podcast?
Yeah.
And I think it's authenticity. You as a host, I think, need to be so invested and believe in your product. And as you've mentioned, we're not making money from this directly. You know what I mean? We're not got running adverts. This is one of the podcasts you can listen to without a single advert. Um, but it's authenticity. It's people, I believe in this product, and my guests are coming in and they're being really authentic. They're not trying to create an image. They're not trying to impress anybody. They're just telling it as it is. I've only had one guest come in with a script, and she started trying to read from the script. And I was like, and I thought, please don't. And very quickly that got put to one side and it became a more natural, free flowing conversation, which I was really happy about. But I think those are the components, right? Honesty, true emotion. And here's the thing, you don't have to be a really good speaker. You don't have to be a polished, well-spoken professional. You're telling your story. The words do the work for you. And of course, as a producer, then I will go through later and tidy up. I'll take out the ums and the ers and some coughs and splutters. That is no problem. I love doing that. I really enjoy tidying up the audio and putting the music at the front and back. And, so I just love that, how accessible it is to everybody. But those are the components, definitely, that if you're dealing with something that involves a lot of emotion and passion, and it's true, you're not trying to spin a lie, you're not trying to impress anybody, then there's the qualities for a successful podcast for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I am also surprised that you say, I think you're one of the only ones in 150 episodes that says, I also enjoy the editing and the producing.
I love
Because
it.
I was a little bit surprised that you do it yourself. You must have a sound engineer or someone at the radio station who could do that for you. But
yeah, but it's my baby. If you're
Yeah.
listening, pun. This is my baby, and I'm so passionate about it. I know how I want it to sound, and I know which elements I want to really make sure are highlighted. No, I adore it. I zoom right in and just, I love all the editing. I've been asked before, what do you prefer, production or live radio, like presenting? And it's a split. I love the passion and the excitement and the connection with listeners in real time of being a presenter. And yet I love squirreling away in a studio, zooming right in on those sound waves and getting the audio to sound really, really great. And I'm not even a perfectionist. But I love both parts equally. So I am very much a one-woman show. I have the full support of my CEO. And I need to say at this point, actually, he's been fantastic. He's called James Niche. And when I went to him with this pitch, this idea last year, he said, I need no persuasion. I need no convincing. The concept is there. It's powerful. And he is all about local and making sure that our products meet the needs of the community. And he's very much given me free rein. I have nobody breathing down my neck, nobody demanding answers and updates. He's let me have full creative control on this podcast, and it's working because of that. I don't think I would respond too well to having, it would be nice maybe to delegate, but again, I think I'm just so invested in the individual stories. I have the assistance of my broadcast colleague, my broadcast assistant, who can help look after things while I'm away or maybe reply to a couple of emails. But on the whole, I am doing 99% of it myself with the full support and freedom of my CEO, thankfully. And I think he's happy with how he's seeing my updates. He's seeing the Facebook page, every week, the summary of what each episode contains. And he's seeing that that's running itself really nicely. It doesn't have to be his area of interest, for example, does it? But he can see that it's a product that it seems to be working for the corporation. But no, I love the editing, Anne. That's one of the best parts.
Yeah, I love it too, but yeah, most people don't. So most podcasters I speak to, they love the talking, but they yeah.
But again, that puts me in a really special position. I have full capability of making the episode sound how I want it to sound. I don't have to ship it off to Fred in an office down the road and say, please, can you make it sound good? No, thank you. I'll do that myself. And I'll make it sound really good, and that's really important to me. And again, I think my guests trust that I'm not shipping this audio off to lots of different people or whole teams to deal with like any other piece of audio. It's not. It's a very special story and it deserves to be treated very sensitively. And that's exactly what I bring to it. Oh, I love it. I really do.
Yeah, the listener cannot see your face, but I can. So I believe you. So yeah, in 21 episodes, and with all that experience that you already have, but there must still be blunders or bloopers that happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
None major. What I will say is I've been really fortunate so far, and probably because I'm so invested and I think about this podcast all the time. I quadruple check people's surnames, spellings, for example, and how I'm describing their story, the language that I'm using. I have to be so focused on that. So I haven't had any major bloopers, but for sure, it's a great question because it has been a massive learning curve for me. Now, here's the thing. People are telling me these incredibly powerful stories. And I'm not a counsellor. I'm not qualified as a mental health specialist. I'm not a medical professional, as we established. In fact, I'm very queasy and I could never be a midwife. But, I can hear the difference in the episodes. When I listened to the first few, and I was a bit nervous and I didn't know if this was going to work, I'm talking over I'm doing too many ahas. Yeah, aha. And I've had to take a lot of me out. And I've learned active listening a lot better. I've learned to just shut up, to wait. You might have gathered I'm capable of chatting quite a lot, but it's been brilliant for me to learn how to let spaces work and when to gently tease something from a guest. And I can hear that when I listen to some of the earlier episodes. I can just hear that I've grown as a host and a producer. So that's been really, really interesting. Are the bloopers, if you want to call it that, I had a guest come in, and when she arrived, she pretty much burst into tears straight away because a part of her story involved a loss many years ago. And we sort of spoke about that and I consoled her and then we got set up and I made a hot drink. But I wished I'd clarified a bit more at that stage, how much does she want to share? Because then during the episode, there was a bit of a sort of a patchy grey area where I wasn't sure if we should touch on that again or not. And I just wish I learned again from that, have a bit of more of a conversation about telling your guests what to expect. That was a bit of a tricky one. And so as a result, I don't know that the episode truly captures the elements of that story as well as it could. But then I haven't had anybody else do that, arrive and like be very emotional on the spot. So that was an interesting one. Other things, I take one photo with each guest. So here's the thing, for the Facebook and social media pages, Born on the Rock, I always post a picture of me and the guest. And that is because I give each of them the opportunity to share any photos that they might want to share of the bump, newborn, scans as a family. And I always say you don't need to show the kids' faces. If you want to protect privacy, it can just be the backs of the kids' heads or holding hands or silhouettes on the beach or whatever. I give people the choice, but I always take a photo with the guest just in case somebody turns around and says, no, thank you. Or look, the photos are from the 1970s. I haven't got any. And so I make sure I've just got like a holding photo, me plus guest, and they're always slightly different. I try and change my pose and my clothes each time. But there was one guest, there's only been one who I forgot to take the picture, and it took months to try and track down, because here's the thing, all of my guests are really busy. Like, they often, quite ironically, one of the reasons they can't come to the studios is childcare.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so anyway, in that instance, there's only the one person I forgot to get a picture. We had to arrange for her to pop in specially just to take that picture. So I make sure we don't forget that bit anymore now. So I'd say those are some of the biggest, no major bloopers, thank goodness, but I have to check spellings. I have to double, triple check everything. And I've got a lot better, at language and just how I'm listening to those guests and how they're sounding. So I don't want any bloopers. I'm crossing my fingers while we're chatting. Hopefully that was...
Yeah. No, but nothing really serious then. And as long as you learn from it, that's what they're there for, I think, also. Huh?
Yeah. But this is it, because these stories are so special, I can't afford to make bloopers. I can't afford to get things horribly wrong. I did have one guest, actually, Anne. I don't always share the summary of the episode with my guests directly because I don't want it to become a back and forth in like a joint piece of work. And then I want to be able to summarize things, have it as a draft, make sure that it's really accurate and post it so that they all have the same style, if that makes sense. I don't want it to be too much of a collaborative effort on every single episode. I need to be able to draft the post and be confident with it. Where there's been some stories with very complicated or intricate medical processes or long medical names, terminology for illnesses and genetic disorders, for example, I've really wanted to check those. And in one case that worked out really well. I had on episode 2 or 3, a lady who's had 7 children, all girls, by the way.
Oh, wow.
I know, that's one of my most downloaded episodes.
Yeah.
Mothering multiples, and she speaks so cool and so calm, like it's the most easy thing in the world to have 7 girls. Anyway, just before her episode went live, she said, I sent her that paragraph, and she said, "Oh, I got the wrong body part." I said fallopian tube instead of uterus or something like that. And she was like, "I have to, please, can we correct that? Because it's going to make no sense at all if a midwife or a medical professional is listening." And so in that instance, I got her to, it wasn't ideal, but I got her to like just send me a WhatsApp note, a few different intonations to try and slot that word in. It doesn't sound great, I'll be honest, Anne, but it's one word and now it makes sense. And listen, you'd have to have been listening for like 38 minutes to notice that tiny edit. And I'm fine with that because at least now it's accurate. And she was happy. She was happy that we sort of fixed that little blunder.
Yeah. In that case, I would also try to find a solution like that. Or, well, in these days, if you record online, that there are AI tools that can change that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
but,
know?
Yeah.
Anne, you just mentioning AI, do you know one of the hardest things I'm finding is to find a title for each of my episodes? Because I can't just have their names. It doesn't mean anything. Anybody searching for a podcast story needs to be able to see some of that information. Obviously, I use all the tags to list things like, any illnesses or cesareans or premature baby. I use like keywords, but the title has probably been one of my most challenging parts. How do you summarize how do you summarize 7 births in like 3 words? I did it. Mothering multiples with, my guest name. But that I find actually takes some time. And I did have somebody suggest to me, just put it in AI. Just tell AI, the details of the story and let it come up with a title. And I was like, no, not doing that. It needs to be authentic. But I tried it just in case. And I was, slightly annoyed that it came up with some really good suggestions.
Well, it does. I take pride in coming up with episode titles also completely independently by myself for my own podcast and for my clients' podcasts. But sometimes I've listened to the episode and I've done the editing and I'm writing the show notes and then I'm like, a title. And sometimes I can be stuck. And because you want to be original, but also you want to have search words in there. Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? Sometimes, and you think that's going to be the easiest part, just whack a title on there. But
it's not.
Actually takes
it's
so
the hardest part, I think, sometimes.
People probably don't always realize that, but often
I have used AI.
Yeah.
And then I've never used an actual title that was suggested to me by, I use Headliner, by the way. I'm very happy with that tool. But I've never used an exact title that they suggested, but it does give me inspiration. And then I workshop the like 7 titles that they propose, and then I usually can come up with something really cool.
Yeah. There was only one episode where I tried it because this girl had the most whirlwind few years. She'd got married. She'd had 2 babies. Has supported her husband with a transplant. Like she'd moved house. She got a new job. Like the story was like this, up, down, up, down. I was like, how on earth do I summarize that in like 3 words? So that
ups and downs with.
Yes. Actually, we went for a fast-tracked family in the end because everything happened within like 2 years. She just had this crazy 2 years. But that title was the hardest one for me to find because there was so much to capture. But I managed to make sure it was family related. That has surprised me how tricky it is to find a really sympathetic, accurate, informative title for all of the beautiful data you've just recorded. How on earth am I going to describe this? All my guests, are happy to use their names. I wondered if some people might want to stay anonymous. And they haven't, especially in a small place like this. And I did think perhaps people don't want to identify themselves, but listen, nobody's got anything really to be ashamed of. These are not, these are not things that are to be too embarrassed about. So actually all of my guests have used their full name in their episodes and in the title, which again, I wasn't expecting. I thought that was quite refreshing.
Yeah. I can. Yeah. But also to do it anonymous, of course, I guess the option is always there to do it anonymously, but because you are such a small community, there must be always someone who recognizes the story. And so how long can you stay anonymous?
Yeah. And actually, that's some of the feedback we've had is people saying, for example, one of my other most powerful, most shared and most downloaded episodes is called One Twin. That's number 11. Ironically, 1-1. That title itself is really powerful because there should never be just one twin, right? There should always be two twins. So this is obviously a story about loss, really powerful. And the guest involved does a lot of fundraising for lost charities and support. And that one got shared. She shared that on her page and on the charity page. And that one just had a massive spike. And you look at the data and the stats, I was like, whoa. I mean, that episode was particularly powerful. And the feedback I had was people saying, oh, I always knew that family experienced a loss, but I never knew the details. Or I've always wanted to ask her what happened, but I haven't wanted to upset her. And so it answered questions in a community that might already have known about that incident. It helped. And she was telling that in her way. Do you know what I mean? She wasn't being put on a sofa and just told to answer a few soundbite, quick fire questions. She could breathe and explain that story. And it's powerful and it's actually difficult. There's only been like 2 or 3 episodes that I've felt my voice compromised and choked up, because of the power of the emotion. But that was definitely some of the feedback we had on that one. Being a small community, I knew about that family, but I didn't know what happened. And, she's not just saying it, she's then being able to direct people, here's support. If this has happened to you, check out these sites. And so I do put those in the show notes.
All right. Cool. Well, I think you've answered all of my questions without me even having to ask them because you came very well prepared.
I did. I just really, it's been so lovely to be able to tell this to somebody from outside of Gibraltar, and to show the work that the corporation is doing. As I say, if you go to gbc.gi, there's a podcast section there, and these other ones I was describing to you about, the election watch and the news program that gets updated every day. There's a few podcasts there. This one comes up. It's got a lovely purple logo. I was so bossy about the logo ad. Department. I was because you know how you want it to look.
Yeah.
I was driving myself crazy with different. I came up with about 50 different logo designs, and they were all rubbish. They weren't quite right. And then I eventually pinned down one of our brilliant arty dudes. Oh my gosh, can't think of his job title. One of our great guys in production, anyway, creative director. And he came up with this and it was nearly right. And then I was like, can we do this? Can you move that? Can you make that bit smaller? Can you make that bit bigger? And between us, we came up with the logo that I'm really happy with. But my gosh, that took me months to be able to get it looking how I wanted. That's just as a complete aside. So yeah, when you go over to GBC.gi, look for that purple logo, take a few moments to marvel. It shows the shape of the rock and a woman with a big pregnant belly. So I love that just looking at that image tells you there's a pregnant lady, there's the Rock of Gibraltar. So it's really powerful without even reading the title. So
all right.
It's great to be able to explain.
It's also going to be in the episode cover of this episode. So listeners will be able to see it there also. And I love that it's purple. This purple is my color.
Yes, me too. That was always my favorite color. Yeah. Listen, a lot of my decisions to do with the podcast have been intuitive. Same with the music that I've selected. And, I'm doing things on what feels right, what feels like the best fit. And I'm finding that that's working. And I do think for many big decisions in life, you've got to go with your gut, haven't you? Yeah. And so a lot of Born on the Rock is generated by that genuine passion and intuitive decisions. And it's just growing itself beautifully. I'm so proud of it.
Yeah. All right. Passion and intuition. Good combination. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So exhausting. But yeah.
Yeah. No details. Yeah. All right. So other than the website that you just mentioned, I suppose we can also find the podcast on Spotify, Apple, and all the apps.
Yes. Yep. So all the main streaming platforms, it's there on the GBC website as well. And yeah, I'm not on X and TikTok and the like. The two social media channels we've gone for is Born on the Rock, Instagram and Facebook. And that's where you see the pictures. And I know, as having listened to other birth stories, podcasts, it's great when you've heard a story and you sort of feel as though you know the person and you're really invested and you've heard them describe their beautiful children. And to then be able to go over and see the photos that match, you think, oh my gosh, she's a real person. Oh my gosh, there's those two kids I've just heard all about,
Yeah.
And I love providing that aspect of it. And that's why for Instagram and Facebook, I think it's a really nice complement to the audio to give like that full picture of that family and that story. It just makes it so much more relatable, I think.
Yeah, it does. It does. And it's a good alternative because your podcast is audio only, but that way you can still show people some visual aspects of the story and really good
exactly.
idea. Yeah.
I was not too interested in having anything videoed, as I mentioned. That's been one of the best things about the podcast is that it's not videoed, it is audio only. And that's what I'm all about. Look, I'm a decade in radio. For me, I've dabbled in a bit of television, but I'm always much happier behind the microphone than the camera.
All right. So I'm going to ask you also this question that I ask every one of my guests is, do you know any other podcasters that would like to come on this show?
I'm trying to, I know there's a few here locally that touch on totally different topics. And what's really special is that they are very regional. So we've got some business related ones and we've got some to do with culture and history. We've got a very dynamic person called the Janito Doctor who talks about, landmarks and some of the military history. And he does a lot to promote the Rock. So I know that podcast has been very popular. That's seen a bit of an increase. As I say, I know there's one for local business federation, looking at grouping businesses together. And obviously with all this stuff with trade and Brexit and blah, 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 which we're not going to talk about. That's a really interesting topic for Gibraltar, plus, of course, all the ones on our own website on gbc.gi. So, some of those locally, but I like listening to others from outside the Rock. I like listening to, I've tried a few different ones, but isn't it weird how if you don't like the host, it can be quite hard to connect, even if you're really interested in the subject?
Yeah.
I find that with some of the really strong American accents.
Oh, yeah.
Celebrity podcasts, they'll interview a musician who I'm really interested in, and look, it can give me content for my show. I need to be aware of music news, but very strong accent can be quite off-putting, even if you're interested in the topic. There are a few locally. I don't know what the podcast landscape looks like on the Rock, but certainly the two I mentioned there, the GFSB and the Janito Doctor, are two that seem to be doing quite well.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much, Lucinda, for your time and for your vibrant presence in my virtual recording studio. I'm sure the listeners will also enjoy this episode as much as I did talking to you now. And who knows? Maybe next year we will see each other again at Radio Days.
Who knows? Yeah, let's see.
In Riga, it will be in Latvia.
Yeah.
I haven't decided yet, but
It was really lovely meeting you there, and it was so great at Radio Days to see the prominence of podcasting as a newish medium, just how that translates in so many different areas, locations, genres, and just what it means to different people, because there is not a textbook right and wrong podcast. And I love that about it, really.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Everyone is always very surprised when I talk to people that are new in podcasting, and then I tell them, there's only one rule. And then they'll go, okay, what is it? What is it? Tell me the secret. There are no rules.
They're like, thanks for that.
Yeah. So, okay. So thank you very much. And we will keep in touch. And bye-bye. Thanks you.
Thanks so much for your time, Anne. Really appreciate it. It's lovely catching up with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I'm happy that you chose to spend your time listening to me and my guest. And I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you don't want to miss any episodes, just click follow. you will recognize the English spoken episodes by the little country flag in the episode title, which tells you where my guest is from. If you would like to do my guest and me a huge favor, then please give both of our podcasts a 5-star review. And we also love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to send us a message. You can find all our contact details in the episode description. Till next time!